Imagine a world where the key to better public service isn't actually about more layers of control, but maybe about building more trust. That's the intriguing question we're diving into today on the deep dive. We're exploring a concept that's both ancient and incredibly relevant to modern governance stewardship.
It's a pretty profound idea, yeah. And for this deep dive, we're really unpacking stewardship specifically through the lens of public service. So focusing on that crucial relationship between politicians and public employees. Our sources delve into some really fascinating research, including a compelling case study from a Danish municipality. Our mission really is to understand how embracing stewardship could potentially break the vicious circle of escalating control that you often see frustrating public sectors everywhere.
Right, that idea of trust is the key. That's really interesting. But, okay, before we get into how it works today, let's peel back the layers on stewardship itself. It kind of sounds like a buzzword, one we hear a lot. But our sources show it has these incredibly deep roots, right?
You're absolutely right. Yeah, it does sound modern sometimes, but it's not. At its core, stewardship is, well, it's an ethical ideology. It's centered on the responsible planning and management of resources, always with a strong emphasis on long-term concern for others. Its origins truly span millennia, tracing back to ancient cultures like Greek, Roman, Jewish societies. And it became explicitly embedded in Judeo-Christian ethics, where, humanity was given this responsibility to care for the earth, to cultivate it, make it productive.
So it's certainly not a new concept then. I was really struck by that example of the medieval steward, the senior domestic servant managing a noble household. What was so significant about that role? How does it show this care aspect you're talking about?
Oh, it's a perfect illustration, because they weren't just like managers. They combined roles: administrator, curator, guardian. They were accountable for both protecting and developing the assets they were entrusted with. They really embodied that care aspect. We even see figures like Abiel of Mari, way back around 2400 BCE, cited as one of the first known stewards in recorded history. The core meaning consistently revolves around service over self-interest, willingly putting your own interests aside to protect others' long-term welfare.
Service over self-interest.
Yeah. And it's seen as this intergenerational obligation. Edmund Burke famously put it as a partnership not only between those who are living, but between those who are living, those who are dead, and those who are to be born. It's about passing things on, environments, institutions, in as good a condition as possible, ideally better.
And this isn't just ancient history or theology we're talking about, right? The sources highlight how this deep-seated principle applies to very modern challenges too.
Absolutely. Yeah. Stewardship has definitely evolved into key modern spheres. For instance, environmental stewardship that focuses on sustainable use and conservation of natural resources. Pretty obvious link there.
Right.
Then there's corporate stewardship, where managers are expected to act in the best interests of the corporation and its shareholders long-term.
Okay.
And even digital stewardship, which is all about the responsible management of, digital information and resources, data, privacy, preservation, all that stuff.
Digital stewardship. Didn't think of that one.
Yeah, it really shows its universal applicability. You see it from ancient parables like Joseph in Egypt managing resources for a future famine, right up to modern legal rulings like Germany's Supreme Court linking climate legislation to the rights of future generations. It really brings the idea home,
Okay, so now let's zoom in on how these ideas specifically impact public service. Because our primary source, breaking the vicious circle of escalating control, it sets up this really powerful contrast between two theories that fundamentally shape how we think about principles and agents in public service. Let's start with the one that probably feels most familiar. Agency theory.
Right, agency theory. It's rooted in economics, and it's fundamentally, a conflictual theory. It basically presupposes that actors are self-interested. They'll pursue their own gain. The model of man, as they call it, is egocentric.
Okay.
So in that principal-agent relationship, let's say politicians are the principals and public employees are the agents. There's an inherent conflict of interest assumed right from the start.
So if agency theory paints everyone as self-interested, what kind of system does that inevitably lead to? And what are the downsides of that intense focus on control?
Well, it leads directly to principles recommending high power distance, using formal institutional power like the democratic sovereignty politicians have to keep the agents in check. Those rules, monitoring.
Control.
Exactly. But that's precisely where the critics argue it falls short. This approach, it can really erode trust. It spurs excessive control, and it can actually crowd out motivation among public employees.
Crowd out motivation.
Yeah, and this creates what the article calls that vicious circle of escalating control. Politicians react to some local failure by bringing in more general rules, which then leads to even more demotivating control for everyone, which paradoxically can increase the likelihood of more mistakes down the line. It just spirals.
Wow. So, okay, if agency theory creates this kind of treadmill of control, how does stewardship theory offer a different path, a more maybe optimistic view? Does it fundamentally flip that dynamic?
It certainly offers a profound shift, yeah. Stewardship theory, which has its roots more in psychology and sociology, it posits a fundamentally different model of man. It suggests that public employees are often intrinsically motivated. They act as stewards who are genuinely committed to collective goals and the principal's interests.
So the emphasis shifts. It's more collaboration over conflict then, a completely different foundational belief, isn't it?
Exactly. In the stewardship view, high power distance and really detailed controls are seen as stifling for these, pro-social stewards. Instead, stewardship recommends reducing institutional control, increasing employee discretion.
Giving them more autonomy.
Right, and building trust through direct connection. When stewards make mistakes, it isn't immediately seen as, like, self-serving behavior. It's maybe a lack of competence or maybe not enough alignment. So the focus shifts to empowerment, training, collective learning, rather than just correction or punishment.
And the type of power used changes too then, from that formal top-down thing to something more, well, personal, relational.
Yes, that's a really key distinction. Principles in a stewardship model tend to rely more on informal personal power, like referent power or expert power stuff developed through genuine relationships. Low power distance is vital here. It fosters loyalty and trust because it enables employees to internalize the organizational values through dialogue, through connection. The really striking insight here is this. While agency aims to reduce risk by enhancing control, stewardship aims to absorb risk by building trust. It's a completely different way of managing risk.
Absorb risk by building trust. That makes perfect sense in theory. But are these two theories like mutually exclusive in the real world? Or can they somehow coexist? Do they have to pick one?
That's a great question. And what the research really highlights is that they aren't necessarily mutually exclusive. Not at all. While they offer these competing models of man, agency and stewardship theories can actually interplay. Stewardship isn't about, completely replacing agency. Rather, it can modify, balance, and even transform existing agency practices. It's about finding the right blend, the right mix for the situation. Our source actually provides a really clear table, Table 1, that contrasts their ideals and practices across motivation, management style, leadership, power base, power distance. It makes those practical differences and how they might combine incredibly clear.
Right. Okay, it's one thing to talk theories, but how does this actually play out on the ground? Our source dives into this fascinating qualitative case study. A Danish municipality that started a trust reform. This sounds like a direct application of these stewardship ideals, right?
It absolutely is, yeah. Copenhagen Municipality, it's the largest public organization in Denmark, launched its trust reform back in 2012. And the explicit goal was to combat excessive control, high transactional costs, and that crowded out motivation we talked about.
Okay.
Then in 2013, they even introduced a code of trust specifically for political leadership, emphasizing trust building and expanding employee autonomy. It was quite deliberate.
And Denmark is known as a high-trust country, isn't it? With highly decentralized municipalities. That probably helped set the stage for something like this.
Yeah, that context is likely important.
So how did the politicians actually integrate these stewardship ideals into their existing, agency practices? What did it look like in Copenhagen?
Well, the study identified several key empirical patterns that show this blend in action. First, a perception of employee motivation. Politicians now generally seem to see employees as trustworthy, pro-socially motivated stewards. That's the default assumption.
Okay.
So when local mistakes happen, they tend to focus on targeted support for the specific problem areas rather than implementing these blanket rules that punish everyone.
That makes sense.
However, and this is key, they haven't abandoned agency thinking entirely. They still identify and sanction the bad eggs, those few driven by egocentric goals. But they isolate these cases from the good crowd. There's a great quote from the mayor about a home care center where a few employees cheated, but he refused to scold all the stalwart ladies because of it. It shows that nuanced approach.
That's a crucial distinction, isn't it? Not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, but being more discerning. Okay, so How did this impact their management style? Did they just stop monitoring?
No, not entirely. There's a clear ambition to reduce excessive external monitoring and delegate more autonomy. The Code of Trust explicitly encourages politicians to have the courage to let go of detailed control. Yet they still view external monitoring as legitimate and necessary for accountability, especially, for citizen protection. You can't just abandon that. But what's crucial is that they now differentiate the control based on local needs and risks. So, for example, experienced leaders might only face annual budget control, while newer ones might have it 4 times a year, more tailored.
Cellular control, okay.
And they also involve local employees in co-creating the control systems, which naturally fosters a much greater sense of ownership.
So it's not a free-for-all, but more collaborative, tailored control. Got it. What about their leadership style? How did that change?
Well, politicians are increasingly focusing on empowering these stewards through training, professional development, collective learning. They see this as a prerequisite for reducing control later on. You have to build capacity first.
Right. Investment.
Yeah. And they praise and acknowledge successful leaders publicly, not just, with financial bonuses. It's about recognition, too. But again, agency practices persist. They stress that greater autonomy comes with harsher sanctions when trust is repeatedly broken. They see that as vital for preserving the overall trust in the system.
Okay, so it sounds like there's still a strong emphasis on both the carrot and the stick, maybe, but with a different balance and a focus on building trust first. How did this shift affect their power base?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. For the power base, there's definitely a growing emphasis on personal and rhetorical forms of power. You see politicians acting as ambassadors of trust, using metaphors like turning the pyramid upside down to inspire local actors. It's about establishing that personal connection.
Right, leading by example almost.
Exactly. Yet they still use institutional power when needed, sometimes even coercively, to ensure the administration aligns with the reform. One mayor admitted having to control things in detail right at the start just to make sure the administration was on board with the whole trust idea. So it's a continuous negotiation, really.
Pragmatic. And finally, power distance. This seems like it would be a really tangible shift. How did politicians actually try to bridge that gap, make themselves more accessible?
Yeah, this is perhaps the most, radical shift identified. Politicians actively worked to reduce power distance through direct face-to-face dialogue. Things like coffee meetings, visits to workplaces. There was even an example of a political leader spending a whole week interning by shadowing a healthcare assistant.
Wow, really?
Yeah, and apparently this hands-on experience profoundly changed their perception of the control problems on the ground. Local actors noted how unusual this direct engagement was, how different from the norm. But interestingly, while they create these new low-power distance arenas, they still maintain the traditional high-power distance in formal settings, like city council meetings. So it's a kind of dual approach, recognizing the need for both formal structures and informal connection.
Okay, so putting this all together, what does it mean for public leaders out there who might be considering this kind of stewardship approach? The study highlights both big opportunities and some pretty clear challenges. What's the main takeaway?
Well, the main takeaway is that while it looked immensely promising, adopting a stewardship approach isn't, a magic bullet. It's not without its hurdles. But let's start with the opportunities. The gains look significant. First, better problem diagnosis. Just getting employees directly involved provides so much new knowledge and insight. One politician apparently said they never would have believed the time wasted on documentation if they hadn't talked directly to frontline staff.
Just hearing it firsthand.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This also leads to more robust solutions. When you engage local leaders and employees in actually designing the control systems, you get better solutions that have greater ownership and, frankly, just work better. The home care control system redesign was a key example.
Makes sense. Collaboration works.
And perhaps most powerfully, there's enhanced mobilization of support. Stewardship really seems to be a powerful driver for mobilizing support and engagement among public employees. They feel backed up, inspired, which leads to smoother implementation of decisions.
Those opportunities sound incredibly compelling, especially for public service, which often struggles with morale. But you mentioned challenges. What are the major roadblocks or risks for leaders trying this?
Indeed, there are definitely clear challenges. One big one is political competition and discontinuity. A scandal hits or an election is coming up. The pressure can mount for politicians to just abandon stewardship and revert to immediate agency-based reactions. Control looks decisive.
Right, the quick fix.
Yeah. Loyalty to the trust reform can be challenged when a quick win, if a scandal occurs, is politically attractive.
Yeah, I can see that.
Another challenge is potentially blurred decision-making processes. Lower power distance is great for connection, but it can create diffuse processes, maybe challenging traditional transparency and accountability. The example given was a physiotherapist directly telling the mayor about potential downsizing, bypassing her manager entirely, which apparently led to some confusion.
Yeah, lines can get blurry.
And finally, there's the very real issue of administrative resistance and competence gaps. The administrative machinery, often accustomed to control and numbers, can actively resist shifting to a trust-based approach. They might just lack the competence or the will to facilitate co-creation processes. That need to unlearn the old ways is a significant hurdle. You can't underestimate that.
So, okay, we've talked a lot about politicians and public employees. But what's the bigger picture here? How does this concept of stewardship fit into the wider fabric of modern democratic governance beyond just that specific relationship?
Well, if you connect this to the bigger picture, stewardship in public service is fundamentally aiming to protect the long-term capability of the state, right? To defend government institutions from, well, subversion or decay, all while exercising due care of public resources. Ultimately, it's about securing and maintaining public trust through effectiveness and ethical conduct.
And that's critical, isn't it? Especially now.
Absolutely. Because as data from places like Pew Research Center shows, public trust in government has been worryingly low for decades. In the U.S., for example, only around a quarter of Americans trusting the federal government since the 2008 financial crisis. Stewardship could be part of the answer there.
And this concept also relates to something else mentioned in the sources, new public stewardship, as a kind of reaction to new public management. Can you unpack that distinction for us a bit?
Sure. New public management, or NPM, was really big in the 80s and 90s. It largely assumed civil servants were those self-interested agents we talked about, needing control, targets, market mechanisms.
Right, very agency theory-based.
Yeah. Exactly. New public stewardship, or NPS, directly counters this. It starts from the belief that public officials are often intrinsically motivated, that they value service to the greater good and seek job satisfaction through organizational success, not just personal gain. New Zealand's Public Service Act of 2020 is a really prime example of NPS in action. It explicitly embeds stewardship as a core principle for the public service.
How so?
Well, one concrete example is it requires government departments to prepare these long-term insights briefings, looking 10, 20, 30 years ahead, and crucially, prepared independently of current ministers to ensure a long-term impartial view. And interestingly, this reflects influence from the Maori concept of kaitiakitanga, which emphasizes long-term guardianship.
That's a fascinating connection to indigenous cultural values shaping modern governance. Okay, this raises one more big question for me. In a world facing these huge, complex, wicked problems, climate change, pandemics, things no single country can solve alone, how does stewardship play a role on that kind of global or systemic level?
That's where the idea evolves into system stewardship. It suggests governments need to shift from that old command and control model towards facilitating and guiding complex systems. It means recognizing the deep interconnectedness of these challenges, moving away from purely hierarchical leadership to fostering collaboration, participation, and reciprocity across all sorts of different actors, other countries, NGOs, businesses, communities.
So it's about orchestrating cooperation rather than dictating solutions.
Precisely. The ultimate challenge, of course, remains how you actually measure long-term impact in these complex systems, how you allocate resources beyond short-term political cycles, and how you maintain political neutrality when politicians inevitably face those immediate pressures. It's an ongoing evolution, really.
Wow, what a journey we've taken. From, ancient stewards managing households to Danish municipalities trying trust reforms, and now even tackling global wicked problems. It really makes you rethink how public service operates, doesn't it? I mean, we're so used to thinking more control equals better outcomes, but this really does flip that on its head. It's clear stewardship isn't just about managing resources efficiently. It's fundamentally about cultivating trust and ensuring a long-term vision for the public good.
This discussion truly highlights that the core challenge isn't just efficiency, though that matters. It's also about cultivating the willingness and indeed the ability of public servants to genuinely act as stewards, to maintain our institutions, our shared resources for generations yet to come. It's always going to be a balance, isn't it, between control and trust, individual gain, and collective well-being.
So thinking about all this, what does it mean for you listening right now? When you think about the systems and resources you interact with every day, maybe it's your local community, your workplace, or even just how you manage your own personal finances, what does it truly mean to be a steward in that context? How can we look beyond the immediate crisis or the short-term gain to foster something truly lasting, something for the long term, for yourself and for others? Definitely something to mull over as you go about your day.